Hey everybody, welcome to The Goat's Eye View, or as Lena has declared, the goatening is now well and truly upon us. Um, this evening I am joined by Adam, Rachel, Elyse, and we are going to be talking about table talk, or more specifically, communication in tabletop RPGs. This was one of our more requested topics. This is kind of a continuation of last week's DMGM roundtable. We had like this whole block of questions that were all around, how do I talk to people before the game? How do I set this up? How do I get people to, do this? What happens when things are going badly and we need to have a hard conversation? We're like, yeah, we can just kind of circle those, move those to another week. So we get out within 2 hours. Before we get started on everything, I just want to remind people, encourage people again, you can use the BLM command in chat to see some resources that matter. You can also use the donate command, which is currently going to a Minneapolis community health collective, and more specifically to a list of resources suggesting people donate to in order to help with the current situations going on around the country in pursuit of justice. We will probably rotate those through somewhat. And the other thing I'd like to have called your attention to, if you happen to have seen it, our resting screen right now is a piece of art from another Twitch user, Bad Luck Buddha, calling attention to the essentially non-enforcement of the Twitch terms of service against abusers and those who have even engaged in assault and power of their platform on here in order to perpetrate these very, very. So we want to, everyone here at Helpful Go, we are very committed to helping and adding bandwidth to this however we. And as always, I particularly encourage you to reach out to local organizations and find ways that you can help. If you don't have money to donate right now, if you are immunocompromised like I am and can't be out at protests or marches, or it's dangerous for you, there are lots of ways you can help. You can donate goods and services, donate expertise in areas. And while a lot of the big national movements obviously are some of the first places that people link to, local chapters need just as much, if not more. So they will often have very specific things that you can do to help in your community, both for victims of harassment and assault, or for the Black Lives Matter movement. I know for a lot of us, actually, Denver area, the 5280 Denver chapter of BLM is really good about posting resources and ways that you can help, and have been really, really conscientious in the time of COVID-19 about here's ways that you can help that do not involve exposing yourself to massive risk of hospitalization, death. So as always, we encourage you to deepen your understanding of these issues, deepen your allyship, and perform your allyship, and find new ways of doing it. It's super valuable, and it is necessary to advance, I would say, this country, but I don't even mean that, to advance humanity better than we were. So to that end, we're actually talking about, in certain ways, a not less mechanical topic and more of just communications. Lots of people. It's interesting because I personally spend a fair amount of time on like D&D Reddit and things like that, and I would say every third topic is probably, I have X problem. How do I talk about it with someone? Or how do I get people to understand that this is what I want out of this? And we have people with a variety of playing experiences. We also have a variety of people with life experiences. I think that's super valuable. As you've probably heard, if you've caught any of the Goat's Eye Views before, Rachel teaches, and a lot of communication strategies there. Elyse and Adam, you've done lots of work in theater, improv, and communications. Elyse, you've done lots of work in the business world. Stares sadly into it's fine. Fine. I never thought I'd be saying that about myself, but it's true. And so one of the things that we want to provide is not just, hey, here's ways that you talk about character building or anything like that, but just communication strategies generally. A little bit different than most of the other Goat's Eye Views. This is cutting out occasionally. Interesting. Adjust the gain slightly. One of the things that we want to talk about is have this be less a structured, here's a list of questions, though these are very much based on questions that Monty and Tibby had asked in the Discord and that various other users had asked over time in the Twitch chats for various goat sites. So we wanted to acknowledge those people that had contributed to this, but also have a little bit more of a free-form discussion. So just as an open topic, one of the things that's actually a really big point with D&D is how do you set, or D&D tabletop RPGs generally, how do you set yourself up for success beforehand? And I kind of wanted to just generally ask, what tools do you all like to use, perhaps as GMs, or do you like to see used as players, or tips that you've seen online, things like that?
I mean, one tool that I know we've all used in various forms, either as GMs or as players, is just like a consent sheet ahead of time. I'm sure a lot of people in chat too have seen this. Is basically like similar to like a yes, no, maybe sheet or something green, red, yellow, right? There's a bunch of different kind of ways to structure it. And there's some really good free resources that have them available for specifically tabletop gaming. But it's like a list of topics, right? And it's like, how comfortable are you with these topics? And it ranges from things like pretty like common phobias, like bugs and things like that, to like really intense, like commonly shared trigger topics like sexual assault. And it's a nice way to get the conversation started, especially because players can fill it out privately and only the GM has to see it, right? And so the GM can kind of see like, oh, okay, like this is just a very sensitive issue for somebody. We're just completely leaving that out, which is something we did for Spire. I mean, there's so many things Spire that like how are we can't totally avoid some issues of consent and some issues of like slavery, right? Like there's no way to avoid that in Spire. If we didn't want to look at that particular sensitive topic in some way, like we would have to choose a different system besides Spire. And that's just part of the game, right? And that's okay. Like if your players don't want to deal with those issues, then you just don't play Spire. And that's how, I think a lot of systems, that's one thing that D&D is really good for, is you get to build whatever type of world, whereas something like Spire, where the world's already built, you have to kind of like say up front, like, there's no way we can avoid racism in this world. This world is predicated on racism. So we're going to be dealing with it in some way. So if that's something we don't want, then we either change up who is playing in that system, or if we want the same players, then we scrap using Spire and we try something else,
Yeah. And that's certainly one of the tools. I've highlighted it since they came out with it because it was nice to see a larger game publisher start to do it. Monty Cook produced the Consent in Gaming Guide. And a lot of these, it's also worth noting for not attribution because it's not like directly to a person, but a lot of these guides and a lot of these concepts are borrowed from other communities and derived from them. Lines and Veils is also a really common one has a long history of practice in psychotherapeutic interventions. There's also, and for example, like the Monty Cook one is largely driven from the sort of stoplighting system, very common, for example, like kink community. Hey, this is where this works. To be fair, it also gets a little bit weird because they didn't change any of the terms, so there is a box in there for enthusiastic consent for genocide. And I was like,
that was like one of the things I remember reading, like multiple like iterations of that, and someone was like, "Can we rename enthusiastic consent for this? Because I don't really understand how I'm enthusiastically consenting. Like, it feels wrong to click enthusiastic consent to like I'm okay with themes of rape and like that seems." Wrong.
Well, there was like the one of like killing children was a box, and I'm like, I'm fine and don't have any concern if my players are like, I have no problem with this being content of the story. Enthusiastic consent feels a little.
I always find it funny too on those sheets because violence to animals and violence to children are like back to back, and I'm always like, no violence to animals, and on violence to children, I'm like, no, okay. I'm like, am I a bad person?
Yeah, and and one thing I would say, so yeah, we tend to use that. I think we used that before Amber Heart, and I just rolled it over because it was the same group of players. And I always encourage my players to fill it out anonymously, give it back to me, and then if there's any issues that I need to talk about, which aren't even like I don't like this, I feel constrained by this. It's just like I'd like a little more clarity around some things, because sometimes there can also be boxes in there that I'm like, well, okay, no harm to animals. Are you okay with fighting a dire wolf? Or do you mean like if I've got a person torturing a puppy, that's a problem? And those are, I find those.
I enthusiastically consent to puppy torture.
You're a monster. There will be some judgment here, just as a note. But that's I find that the best part of that isn't even just, oh, hey, I've got this little sheet and here's the problems. It's like, it's really useful for me to engender a conversation of, hey, what exactly do we mean by this? Because I don't want to cause harm for anyone. I don't want to, what does that mean? Let's look at that. Let's think about that a little more deeply. And I think that those have been some of the best conversations I've had with players in terms of those comments. I will also very briefly say, and I'm pretty sure we don't have any in the chat, because when I first announced my book gaming, I told these people to fuck off. But if you are someone who, as a DM, are like, no, having to have informed consent in my gaming is an infringement of my rights as a DM, no, it isn't. It is, yes, fuck off. All the way off.
I don't even understand that argument.
Yeah, no, again, I will go back to the point of tabletop RPGs is if you, as the game master, and your players have fun, no one is going to be having fun if they're traumatized. You are doing active harm.
There's a huge difference between emotionally charged content that can get your players feeling like riled up and angry and sad, and traumatizing or re-traumatizing somebody by including themes that especially themes that you already know are triggers for somebody's trauma, right? Like that's worlds of difference. Like, and I think that's why these consent sheets are so important, is because it helps you see like, oh, okay, like nobody in my player group is like traumatized by this particular topic. So it's actually a really great resource to tap for emotionally charged content that isn't going to leave somebody like unable to sleep that night and like having to like call their therapist again after 10 years, which like, hey, I love therapy, I'm in it, I love it, I'm not knocking it, I'm just saying
you shouldn't push somebody to that point.
You shouldn't push somebody to that
for
point.
Fun.
But that's that feeling for me.
Fun, right?
And that's that feeling for me of, if you do it up front, if you have this conversation up fucking front, you can still surprise the players, because I feel like a lot of times, now admittedly they're also just man babies whinging about things generally, and they're wanting to gatekeep a wonderful hobby that I think should be made even more inclusive. But it's like, you can still, okay, I'm sorry, this person is really, really bothered and finds really triggering harm to children. I can, off the top of my head, think of half a dozen things that I could do to produce a really tense, emotionally charged situation that forces the party to act quickly and feels like it has stakes, that are not the villain holding a knife to a kid's throat. And I'm like, but if I didn't know that, if I hadn't had that conversation, I might have gone with the knife at the kid's throat, because as we've been discussing, the harm to children is not really one that worries me that much. It's not deeply upsetting for me. I mean, I don't enthusiastically consent to it. My characters are almost to a person going to stop it, very aggressively stop it. But
it's a big thing, especially with like what I have heard from a lot of like parents that I know, was that they used to not have a problem with it until they had kids, and then like they watch a horror movie, and as soon as like the kid's in danger, they're like, just turn it fucking off. I can't.
My mother made my mother made the comment when I was a kid that, and I was really confused, because she wouldn't watch adult like movies, like R-rated films that had kids in them, because she was like, then there's no point. The only reason a child exists in that movie is for them to be in peril. That's it. That's the only time you ever see a child. And she's like, and I'm not going to do it. I'm scared enough that something bad is going to happen to you or your brother. I do not need to have this lived out on the screen. But the thing that I was saying is like, yeah, I might have completely naively included something like that as an element in the game. And then when it happens, either someone's going to have trauma, very bad feelings, or we need to stop the scene and figure out what to do, which would absolutely be the best if that happened to happen. But that is much more disruptive to the game than having had a conversation weeks before we ever got there, and me going, oh, okay, they're holding key documents hostage, not a kid. Done.
Right.
Party is still pressed to do something.
I did want to say, so about these things that you guys have been talking about, I play in a game with my friends locally here, and it's a pretty intense game. Like, it is very much designed to be like, this is going to fuck with your brain. You are going to have to deal with some pretty intense, like, feelings of depression and anxiety and all of the, like, it's kind of like, and he told us about this ahead of time. It was going to be designed to be like, you're going to have to deal with a lot of shit, and so we all consented to it and talked about it. But every time that we play, if something's going to happen, like just this last weekend we were playing, and before we started, our DM Constantine, he said, uh hey, so you're most likely going to be running into a character where I'm going to be pretty fucking mean to you, like really personal, really really difficult mean things specifically about your character, and just let me know if you can't handle that right now. Like, let me know if that's a big thing. So, like, sure, it took away, like, we knew we were going into a big fight or a big something, but like, that way, somebody like me who was having not the greatest of times could say, I basically said, I don't really know if I'm mentally stable enough for that right now. So, how about you get started with the others, and then I can tell you if I feel like I'm up to it. And then so he did, and I was like, yeah, I could handle this kind of a thing. But it's just, he kind of prepped us in the moment, even though we'd already consented to those things in the beginning, just like, hey, this is going to be really difficult as a part of the story. Are
Yeah.
you up for it? And I really just, that's also a really good thing to just feel, to basically show your players that you are okay if they're not able to handle something that you want to throw at them. Like, if they're allowed to just be honest and be like, I really can't handle somebody like pointing out all my weaknesses right now. That's just not
Yeah.
something I need.
Yeah.
So that was also really useful, that you can just do it. If you know you're coming to a difficult part, just have a conversation about it ahead of time too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's super critical. I mean, as someone, Tibby actually just commented in the chat, it shows that you care about your players. And I would personally say, as a DM and currently both Rachel and Elyse, like, I would hope that I would come across as someone who cares about your mental well-being way more in any possible way, shape, or form than a story beat or anything else. Like, that's more important.
Yep. And I feel like that's also like another thing that I do frequently with my players is check in with them behind the scenes, right? Individually, just like, hey, like, I don't know if I was reading this right, right? It's for me, it's like such an easy thing to say, like, I wasn't sure and I don't want to like project my feelings onto you. So I just want you to clarify for me, right? I wasn't sure if I was reading this right, but something about your expression or your tone of voice kind of indicated to me that you were more upset than just role playing, like that your character was upset. So I just wanted to like double check with you. Are you okay? What happened? Is there something from your experience from the game tonight or whatever that we need to like talk about so that I know to avoid that particular type of thing in the future? And also just offering to players, like if I notice them upset in the moment, like take a break, right? We all go get a snack, get water, and then check in with the player that you notice was upset. Like, should I call it early? Like, I can call it early tonight. I can just say like, oh darn, my dog broke her toenail and I gotta go, right? And then we just quit the game early, and nobody even has to know that that player was upset about something if they were, right? And like those are the kinds of things, like looking out for your players, reading the table in term, and like trying to keep, like, that's kind of not the same as the impetus for this question was like, what do you do way early? But this is like in the moment, right?
It's all
Of like,
going around connected.
We're
yeah,
flowing through
trying
it.
to like read the table and not take it personally, right? Like if someone's looking upset, like that moment of like defensiveness of like, but it's my game, but it's not. Like, it's what we talked about last week, right? It's not your game, it's
Right.
our game. And if someone's upset, then that's the first thing to take care of, right?
But even as a player, that's good. Like, in a game that we played recently, Elyse and I had a thing where I was like getting annoyed visibly at an interaction we were having, and Elyse reached out and was like, "Hey, I'm sorry if I pushed that too far." And it meant a lot to me because I was like, just to have her be like, I'm sorry I pushed that button. And it was nice to be able to be like, yeah, it's okay. I'm sorry for overreacting. And then it was fine, and it didn't have to be like me wondering, well, crap, did I overreact on Elyse and now she's going to be mad? Or Elyse wondering, like, oh, did I offend Rachel and now she's not going to be. It was just like, hey, let me check in. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, we're cool. Here's my thoughts. And then it was done, and we're still friends somehow.
And it's worth noting from my perspective. So like, I mean, in the Fates of Rin, right, Galway, like we've had as a group, as players, multiple kind of hiccups and bumps along the way of like moments like kind of what Elyse was talking about in terms of like the line between role playing feelings and personal feelings kind of getting blurred. And that is a whole other series of like, I think, goat's eye views that we should do at some point is talking about it. But what I want to say right now is that like, it's also, it's a learning process to figure out how to communicate with one another about those things. Like it like sometimes like if it doesn't happen perfectly right away, like the kind of interaction that Elyse and Rachel, like, they're describing, like I would encourage folks to be gentle with themselves too. Like definitely actively try to check in with people, but also like, for Fates of Rin, we've, for the longest time we didn't play with cams on. And that was, one of the big things that came up that we kind of had to talk about as a group after one of the sessions was, interesting to note here, if we were in the same room, or at the very least if we were on cam together, we would have seen each other's faces and we would have known that like there were some heavy feelings going on here. And so checking in like that and is important, but and working together to kind of along the way like develop those open kind of channels for communication. And it's I don't think it ever gets to a point of perfection either. Like, we're human beings, we're imperfect, and we all have shit going on at any given point. And so that's a part of it, is kind of aspiring to this form of open, honest, compassionate communication, and also like being okay and being patient with yourselves and each other when it doesn't go that way. Hopefully, right? And then and checking in again at a time when, okay, can we all like check in and like what was wrong with that session? Like what was difficult? I just, that's such a relevant thing that I know that we've just been experiencing it with the Fates of Rin. Like we've had a few like meetings about like talking about, okay, what is going on, and that's okay. It has to be okay, because if it's not okay, then.
And it's super relevant right now because, like you were saying, Adam, a lot of these things don't happen in the same way when you're all sitting around a table, right?
Exactly.
And like I've had sessions where I could see players were getting frustrated either with each other because there were different ideas in the party, and just like Elyse said, I'm like, let's grab some snacks. I'm hungry. I think I was like, I'm hungry. I want to grab a snack. Let's take a 5-minute break. And what I've generally found is when you're playing, especially with a group of friends around a table, you can intervene if you're GMing or if you're another player, but also generally those players will just sort of talk about it and take the step back. It diffuses a little bit, and then you can have a little bit of a table talk conversation, right? It's like, we're just going to talk over the table about all of this and let's nail this down. And then it kind of smooths back out. But right now, the vast majority of us are not afforded that opportunity. We're playing online. We're playing, hopefully, with videos and mics, because that's way more connecting, I would say, to each other. Like, I've just enjoyed, since we've started playing, just being able to see Adam acting stuff out. Like, it's fun. I enjoy getting to see Andy get really excited about something, and also it adds the extra level of joy when he starts talking with his hands, as I'm doing right now, but he's on push to talk, and I can actually see his mouth going, instead of me being like, we haven't heard anything in like 15 seconds. Did Andy DC? Did his dog pull out the router from the wall again, or is he talking with his? He's talking with his hands.
Just too excited.
Yeah, no, and he'll be like, yeah. I'm like, we can't.
Yeah.
I think it's also. Sorry, Adam. Are you going to say something?
Well, I don't know. I guess not.
Oh.
I was going to say that I have less experience with. I've never GM'd campaigns, like any campaign. I've GM'd 3 times. There's 3 one-shots, and so for me, I've never been kind of in a necessarily like a leadership position of kind of navigating communication channels over the course of a campaign. But I was going to throw out there that, and this is kind of an asterisk. This is kind of, and so it's not quite kind of. Okay, I've got 2 things I want to say. One, like in terms of like the question of setting up the possibility of like of good communication between players and a good kind of overall gaming experience. The one thing that I've kind of done for the 3 one-shots that I've done is just been I've tried to be very clear with players about kind of my MO as a GM and kind of my goal and like what the expectations are around like what this one-shot's going to be like. And every time it's basically the same thing, which is like, look, I don't know what's going to happen in there or out there. And I just, my MO, like the top priority is just having fun. And so, and just trying to take away as much pressure of like, and tension around like, oh my God, like what is this? Just making it seem like, look, we're just playing a game. We're just having fun. And kind of foregrounding that both before the game and then during the game. Like that's been important for me, is just kind of like trying to be very clear, like, look, I just want this to be a good time. And if at any point it's not, let's fucking fix it together and try to make it a good time together. Mm-hmm. That was not quite on the topic of what was being discussed. The second thing I wanted to say was, well, I mean, I see in chat, Lena was saying like, oh man, like maybe I should have been in on this discussion. And like, so weirdly, I've just got like this itch in the back of my head that's like, maybe this is an example of like, maybe I could like model an example of like checking in, right? Like, I'm exhausted right now. And like, I feel like I've already tapped maybe what I could share tonight. And so like, I would like to like at least extend the invitation to Lena. Like, if you want to take my place.
Like, also, for complete transparency, she was invited to this.
She was invited.
Yeah. I was like, just so it's not like, yeah, we just didn't invite her to this.
If she's feeling like she wants to hop in now, that would be one way to do it. And then to be clear, I'm not saying like, guys, I'm not feeling this, I want to leave. It's just that I kind of saw her expressing that, and I was like, oh, well, maybe we could. So, Lena, you DM me or something, but just trying to model like, oh, somebody else might want to participate, and I don't know how much I'm going to be able to like offer after this point. Rachel, do you remember what you were going to say before I? So yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, you didn't do anything. We talked at the same time, so then my voice has been heard a lot more than yours, so I wanted to make sure you could say stuff. Getting back to whatever the fuck track, I don't know, really. Everything's everywhere. Yeah, it's all fine. We've been talking a lot about open communication and being like able and willing to share these kinds of things, but it's also really important and really difficult to be the one that receives it in a way that's good. So like I've trained a lot specifically with communication in children, and like frustrated adults are basically just children. Like a lot of their reactions are the same, very much. And like one of the immediate reactions of frustrated adults and children is to get defensive, And so it's hard sometimes in the moment to not just be like, well, I didn't do that. or no, you're just overreacting or whatever. And I think it's really important to try and notice that in yourself. And you're not always going to notice it right away. Like I am a defensive ass motherfucker. And I definitely sometimes I'm like, no, it wasn't me. You're stupid. And then later on, I was like, yeah, it was me.
It was me.
It was me.
Add that to the quote list.
But like, it's really important to try and. Those are some knuckles. Okay. Like, what am I
See, this is
at?
why I like doing this live all on camera, because I like that in my view, because I'm keeping on my monitor, like the cams are sort of front and center so that I'm looking at least marginally at my camera. And I just see Adam adjust his camera, and in my peripheral vision, I just see two other heads in mine go. Like,
I just saw skin like right here, and I was just like, what you doing, buddy? So
I'm sorry, I was drinking water from an enormous like gallon water jug that I embarrassed about, I guess.
You're fine.
No worries here. But I think it's really important to understand how to notice when you're doing that, and B, understand how to interact with somebody who is doing that, because continually pushing for it is only going to be an argument, and not to use like too much like teacher or whatever language, but like a lot of that stuff is like using so like my last school, I'm not a big fan of like acronyms and shit, and like, which is weird for an elementary school teacher. I know I didn't have a whole lot of those like shiny posters around because I think they're useless and I'd rather talk about things and have a bunch of pictures up. Anyway, but one of the things that we had to have was like, it was, the acronym was like think. And you had like, the T was it true? So like kids lie a lot, and that's not as useful with adults. They lie too, but they fucking do. Like even kids that you wouldn't think would lie, they lie. They're still learning. Is it helpful? Like, is there a reason for you bringing it up? Is it helpful for you to discuss this in this moment? And then I is using I statements rather than like, you fucked up, you did a bad job, you made me angry. It's, I felt this way when this happened. I didn't enjoy, like, it just always kind of framing it around yourself as opposed to being accusatory. And then, so we don't have to go through the whole thing. We're not children. It's fine. But like,
we're 3/5 of the way there.
Yeah,
what?
Just tell us what the N and the K
N
are.
and K.
Right. The N is for is it necessary? So like sometimes kids are huge tattlers and stuff too, so that's where a lot of that comes from. But like, is it really necessary to bring this up? And sometimes people, if you're the person who just wants to stir shit, is it really necessary to do that right now? And then the K was for, is it kind? Because also kids can be assholes. So there's that. But a lot of it is just like thinking about what you say before you say it. And if you come off as really accusatory or keep pushing when somebody is obviously not receiving it well, you're not going to get anywhere, like it's just, you need to think about how you frame things, because people don't like hearing like what you did there really sucked, because they're immediately going to be like, well, fuck you, you don't get to tell me about myself. So
The way that like I often phrase this is like centering your experience, right? So like that's like the I statement, but essentially like it's not about, because perception and outcomes are so often not linked to intention, right?
Yeah.
Someone can intend to do or say something in a certain way, and it can come out sounding completely opposite. So when you say that was mean, you were mean to me, and the person's like, oh my God, my intention was to be nice. Now they're on the defensive, right? Whereas when you center that experience of like, hey, I don't know what you meant, but like I felt really put on the spot. I felt really defensive. I felt like it was just like being attacked. Then it's like that experience. Like you can't say like that I didn't feel that way. Or if you do say that, you're an asshole.
I was gonna say that's a different conversation that's then happening.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so like centering experience, and that's another thing of inviting experience, right? Like that's what I was saying earlier with like players who seem upset at the table. Like I didn't intend to upset them, but I can recognize that they were upset anyway. Right. And so then I'm like, I would like to invite you to share your experience of what just happened with me, because I need to understand, right, how you perceived and what the actual outcome of my actions and words were, despite whatever my intentions may have been. And so that's that's a very grad school feeling conversation for me and Adam, I'm sure, because intention versus outcome is like a huge thing in rhetoric, right? That intention is basically a non-issue in rhetoric. We don't deal with author intent at all, almost. And so but it kind of comes from that of same line of thinking of like center, like I statements and things. But I think it helps also like contextualize why we say like use I statements, because I learned that as a kid. And I think that my brother and I like weaponized I statements against each other anyway, because we didn't understand that the point was centering our own experience. And so like knowing why you use I statements, I think is also important.
No, it's super is, and it's also something that is definitely glossed over a lot by people because they just have these picture things up there that are like use I statements, and kids are like, yeah, sure, whatever, as opposed to it being
I think you suck.
Continual discussion.
Like what I always did as a kid was like, I feel like you were mean to me.
Yeah,
right?
that's what kids try and do, and like you gotta be. I mean,
I feel like you were an asshole. Like,
right?
That's
Kids definitely try that. And not that this is a podcast thing about
eventually
whatever it is about kids, but like it's true. Like these kinds of things, like it's important to actually understand the intention behind what was being done.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's so, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the other thing that I really like about that model and about that model of trying to think about stuff and trying to sort of pause, and to go also to your point, Elyse, of reaching out, in this case, very GM focused advice. But for example, I had a play session in person with a player who was getting that kind of upset where they're disconnecting from what's going on. And they're just not really engaging as much. You know, it's that, yeah, sure, I go with the party. And it's like, okay, something's happening. I'm like, all right, let's take a quick break. And I sort of pulled him aside, and he was like, oh. And as soon as I asked him, he goes, oh, no, it's nothing with you or the game. I literally just got a text about a friend being in an accident. And I know that this is kind of an extreme example, but it's like one of these things that's also really important when we're in, especially this more isolated online context. Sometimes it ain't about the game or the players or the DMing or the story at all. It's something else entirely. Like, I have had days where I know I am not as interactive. You can probably find them in the streams and the podcast where Charity seems weirdly grumpy. And it may be because I was in like a 7-hour meeting that day. Galway was grumpy and I just couldn't do goodest tiefling in that moment. And it's like, but it's important that I then express that to people. And like, I've tried to on some occasions be like, hey guys, I am just gonna be kind of bitchy because I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm drained. And that's just another element of what you were pointing to, Rachel. Sometimes it's not established why people are saying that or why they're sounding like that. It may not be anything that needs to be fixed, but it can always be cared for.
Right. There's also, a lot of good advice there in terms of pregame ritual, right? Of like checking in with each other. Like I think our joke Inspire of like, I need everybody's stress levels, and like every single week everyone's like, well, personally, I'm at a 10, like that joke is good, but it's also like actually legitimately a good TTRPG tool of being like, okay, obviously I need your stress levels in game, but it's good to know, right, that like someone's exhausted or someone got bad news today or whatever, because as a GM, like you can kind of plan around or understand better what's going on in a game. And so as a pregame ritual, like in a lot of D&D sessions or similar types of games, like, yeah, I think it's a great thing to like just kind of put in to the mix, like, hey, let's just check in real quick if anyone has anything they, and I feel like a lot of times players, frequently we come forward anyway with each other, especially if you're playing with friends and just like, yeah, I'll be on at 7, but just so you know, like I've had a really long day, right? Like people do that anyway. But if you kind of make it part of the pregame experience, it can help too.
That's something that I've had in some like theater spaces and experiences, kind of when you're entering a rehearsal space or performance space, just checking in with each other before, like saying like what energy you're bringing into the space before we kind of try to transform that energy into something together. I think that kind of check-in is really valuable. And both pre-game and post-game rituals can be important. I think something that Andy started doing with Dom and Dragons. I forget if did he get the idea from you, Galway?
What are you proud of? That's from me. Yeah, that was me.
You started doing it with
Yep.
Maybe with
tier stuff.
I don't know, maybe with tier stuff.
I don't remember where in tier I started it, but it was a thing. And to give credit, though, I'm not able to attribute it because I don't remember it. It's a thing that I saw on D&D Reddit of a DM was commenting on like, hey, this is a thing I do with my players, and actually would describe one of their players literally burst into tears the first time this was said to them because they'd never been encouraged to be proud of their role playing.
Right.
Yeah. So that post game chat, I've really enjoyed and appreciated that in Dom and Dragons. Just having the opportunity to share what were you proud of? What was a moment that you really liked for yourself or your character in this session? And I think having both pre and post game rituals like that could be a part of establishing a group trust, ideally, right? Like again, like I've never been the GM of a campaign, but I've been a player of campaigns and I've been a part of Helpful Goat for a while, and the process of building trust between one another has been really important, and especially at the times when we've had to kind of when we've lost trust or like lost sight of the trust that we have in each other, and have to come back and remind ourselves and each other like, hey, we all care deeply about this story and the characters. None of us are operating from a position of not giving a shit. So just remembering that, and remembering also like, and we've talked about this, is like remembering that when communication does get bumpy or when moments of tension come up, trying to remind ourselves like really intentionally that we all care about each other and that we're all operating from a place of care and that we're not any kind of hurt that's happening. None of us are doing it intentionally. That can kind of like practicing reminding yourself about that, I think, can help kind of mitigate some of the narratives that we kind of start forming in our heads, absent actual communication with other people. We kind of start making assumptions, or at least I do. I start making assumptions and start forming narratives about what that moment was and what that person was doing or trying to do and what they intended. And ultimately, like every time that I've had moments like that in a D&D context, I feel really fortunate and grateful that we end up managing to just have a time where we check in and sift through, oh, that's what you were feeling, that's the energy you were bringing in, that's kind of the outside circumstances that you were experiencing that is so completely separate from where my space, where my mind was, and when we can put all that out on the table, it's this really powerful, it can really powerfully rebind trust. And granted, like I also want to acknowledge that I guess I'd ask you all, like, does every, like, I feel like this is really relevant for like a really long-term campaign with a group that like plays for years and years, and like these tensions come up. Sometimes, like, are there just short campaigns that just kind of happen and there are no fights or conflicts and there's no need for like interpersonal trust building and like I don't know, like I think they're really valuable, important tools for having. I think playing games and playing D&D and tabletop role-playing games together specifically is a great context for practicing those tools. But sometimes I get kind of self-conscious. I'm like, maybe not every group goes through the shit that we do.
Well, what's funny, you used to say that I DM'd a group that was all new players for a while. And it was a great campaign and it was so much fun. And it was all new players, 4 players. And I was a pretty new GM. And that it went shorter because we had kind of an unfortunate like someone was leaving the country at the end of a certain period of time, and we weren't going to be able to continue the campaign. So we knew that this was like we have like 9 months to play as much of this campaign as we can. But since it was all new players, and I think this is something I also want to touch on something Lena said in chat, because so important.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah, I was
about
gonna say,
the idea
I really
of
want
it.
to get to that.
Like, it's hard to do these things at first. It's also hard to role play at first, which is a different element of like communication at the table that I think we should talk about tonight, because it's not easy to come in as new players and like try a character voice, right? It's not easy to come in as a new player and know like, oh, I can just say whatever the fuck I want and like trust me as your GM to like contextualize that into D&D speak, right? Because there's the feeling that you have to know like, oh, I'm going to ask for an insight check. I'm going to do perception now. I'm going to investigate. What are my skills? It's like, just tell me what you want to do and I'll tell you how to do it in D&D terms, right? But that aside, like that for itself, like there was no real interpersonal conflict at that table because everybody was so caught up in their, how do I even just do D&D conflict, right? How do I even have like my character? But it was great because like everybody eventually, like it took a few sessions, but you know, we talked about it as a group, and like that's again talking about it as a group, the magic happens there. But like where instead of saying like, oh, like I was having interpersonal conflict with another player, it was like them getting excited that their characters were having interpersonal conflict as characters, right? That like someone stole someone's hat and it was a big deal to that person. And instead of just being like, oh, give me my hat back, like that player like played it up and was mad. And like someone else had to use calm emotions to like settle the group down, right? And like everybody talked about that moment after the fact, even though it was just them sitting around the campfire, someone playing a silly prank and someone else getting upset, right? It wasn't like them slaying the Hydra that got them excited. It was this like role play moment, but it really spoke to a different kind of vulnerability that developed at the table, right? Because it was a willingness to share like that more like the acting, the like scary awkward acting side of role play that like not everybody has an acting background and comes into it feeling like strong and ready to do that. Yeah, and then on top of that, I just want to quickly say before I let other people talk too, that like as someone who literally like does workshops and trainings and stuff in this stuff, one of the first things I do, and with Nicole, who I work with on these things a lot, when we do workshops like this, is we make everybody sit there and like just turn to someone else and like practice saying like, I'm sorry. And can you help me with that? And no, I don't want to do that for you, because we don't think of like communication has skills, right? Including things like everyone's like, it's so hard to apologize. How do you find the right words? I'm like, that's a skill you can practice. You can literally practice the words and get the muscle memory in your mouth and your brain down for how do you apologize or how do you say no to somebody, right?
But then don't do it too much like I do.
No. Don't just apologize for everything, right, Rachel?
Mm-hmm.
Are you tempted to say sorry right now? Yeah. Anyway, I'm just teasing, but like saying no to a request, right? Like, how do you say no to somebody? Like, that's a hard thing to do. How do you say in the moment, like, I'm uncomfortable? Practice, right? And like, not even like, oh, every time you feel it, you're on the spot to do it, but like, literally sit around the table and turn to each other, and as awkward and stupid as you feel, just be like, no, I won't do that for you, and see how it feels, right? Get used to that feeling of rejecting somebody, because sometimes you have to do it, and sometimes get used to the feeling of like, I'm really sorry that I fucked that up so bad, right? Like get used to feeling that discomfort in laboratory settings so that when you're at the table and something comes up, you've got the words down, you've got the mindset down, you know it's going to feel a little, and so it's just like the unknown is taken out of it in so many ways, makes it so much easier.
Yeah, that's a good point.
House.
No, that's a good point. And I think it's, you pointed out how hard it can be to say no. And I very much struggle with that, as I'm sure a lot of people do. But like, I struggle with it. And like, and my friends know about this. They know that I like have this thing where I very much want to be everything to everyone and I want to please everybody all the time. Well, I'm also still an asshole. It's a balance. But like, there was a time, it's a be everybody's friend, be everybody's asshole. Wait, no, that's not the saying.
That's different.
But I I was doing something with a friend. I think they were hosting like a friendsgiving at their house, and I was doing all of the big cooking, turkey and the this and the that and all the stuff. And he sent me a message like, "Hey, we forgot this thing." It was on like the day we were going to be doing it. He's like, "Hey, we forgot this thing. Would you be able to go and pick up this and this from the market and bring it here or that?" And like I like anxietied over it before I responded. It was just like, no, I can't. I have all these things to do and this or that. I'm really sorry. And this. And his response was literally just, "Hey, I really appreciate you saying no when you couldn't do it because I know that that's hard and it's not a big deal and we'll get it taken care of. And I appreciate that you felt comfortable to tell me no." And like, that was just such a like, what? Like, like to have somebody else notice that, like, I think like not to always do it, there's again balance. But it's like can be really helpful to like notice when something is a struggle and be like, "Oh, I could tell that was, that was hard for you and I'm glad that you stood up for yourself."
Yeah.
Well, and making it's just part of being a good friend is recognizing that when a friend establishes a boundary, that's not because they hate you or they want you out of their life. It's because they need that boundary there for personal reasons, and being like, "Yo, I love that boundary you just set. Like, am I sad that we can't hang out today? Maybe, but do I love the fact that you trust me enough to say like, no, I can't do that and establish that boundary?" Yes, that's exciting
Yeah.
to me as a friend and as a GM and as a fellow player, right? Like boundaries are worth celebrating, not seeing as like these things that separate us. It's what makes us able to be vulnerable with each other.
I was gonna say, and that's such a huge thing, I think, for also the point that Lena had made, that vulnerability is fucking hard and feels really awkward. And the thing to almost answer a question I could feel potentially coming up in chat or from someone saying that, like, well, how could I support someone doing that? Exactly that. If ever there was a place for enthusiastic consent / enthusiasm, be enthusiastic when someone is being vulnerable. Be enthusiastic when someone is expressing themselves, even if, to our points earlier, they're stumbling while they're doing it. Even if it's not coming out exactly right. Even if they, spelled it thunk, not think, in the process of going through it. I don't know what that would actually... Well, that would make it a you statement.
Use
it works.
Statements.
Yeah, but even if they screw that up, even if there are mistakes, be enthusiastic because these are people who are trying to express a relationship with, and support that and be like, okay, cool. How can we think about this? How can I help? Like, awesome. I'm so glad you came forward with this. I'm so glad that you discussed this. And again, just bringing it sort of into a tabletop context, that is one of the things that I try to do really, really hard because, I know a lot of amazing people who unfortunately have health issues, and trying to, every time one of them says to me, "I'm sorry, I can't make a game, I feel like crap," but and like I hear this entire apology that is built out of people being mad at them, out of people being like, "Oh, you don't care about me," blah blah. I'm like, I know that there is nothing in the world you would rather be except not feeling like crap right now. Thank you so much for telling me, for not pushing yourself. You feeling better is the most important thing. Let's just keep going. And like, even in those contexts, it's like, that's so important to catch the people who are, daring to sort of go off that ledge, because it's hard. It's hard, especially for anyone with like an invisible medical condition, diabetic. It's by no means the most severe of them, but like, I have days where my blood sugars have been up and down and I feel like crap, and I've got a lot of internalized shame about I don't have a cold, so I'm supposed to show up. And it's like, no, I feel like shit. I love you guys. I don't want to play D&D. I feel like shit.
My best friend always says like a mental health day kind of thing, right? She's like, if you would not get mad at somebody for not showing up because they have the flu, like you can then like just apply the same feeling of logic to not getting mad at someone because they can't show up because their depression is bad today, right?
Yeah.
Don't get mad at like the same type, because it's so much easier with things like depression or anxiety, because you're like, well, why can't you just, right? Why can't you just show up? It would help you if you just showed up.
I don't know.
You
Why
wouldn't
can't
say
you
that to
just
somebody
breathe
with the
water?
flu. You wouldn't say that to somebody with food poisoning, right? And those things can come up on the spur of the moment too. And like that's the kind of like you can be sad and disappointed that like a game gets canceled last minute without projecting that sadness and disappointment onto the person who needs to cancel, right? You can just accept the fact that that's how you're feeling and let them feel how they're feeling too. And that's, it's just, I don't know.
Can I
feel
add
like
to what you just said? Sorry, Galway.
No.
Because Elyse and I have talked about this before too. Um, and sorry, brain, I was distracted by the tree outside for some reason. Um,
for what reason?
Is it moving?
None. It's just a tree.
You know my reason. I have this joke. Hey, I have ADHD, which I talk about all the fucking time. I'm sorry, but I have a joke like ever since getting the diagnosis that I'm just like, I did that because I have ADHD. Like I just label everything, and it's just a joke now for me of like everything.
Yeah, but it's fair. But like there was a situation where I had a friend who like something changed and I was sad. Like plans were canceled suddenly and I was sad. And they felt bad that I was sad, but like I wasn't mad at them, and I like they were trying to fix it and trying to be like, "Oh, well, I didn't mean it," or "Oh, this came up." And it's like, "Listen, you can't control that somebody else feels sad about something happening. I'm not mad at you, but I'm also not going to change my feelings to make you feel better. Like
Yeah.
it's okay sometimes that things happen that make people not feel good and they're not mad at you and you can't fix it and that's also okay. Like just to be able to accept that like yeah, this thing that happened made you sad and that's all right.
Yes.
It doesn't mean I'm mad at you. It doesn't mean that I'm holding it against you, but like it's okay for me to feel the feeling that I have and it's not your fault, you know.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes you just need someone to witness it, right?
Yeah.
Just witness that I felt sad and like we
Mhm.
can move on, right?
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
also do love that TTRPGs in general are just such a like gateway to talking about all of these things, which I think speaks to Adam's point earlier of like we should have a session of just like role play in real life, how they collide, because we're basically just in like, how do you be a good friend at this point?
Well, and also, and how do you be a healthier human being for yourself? Like, honestly, a lot of this is I'm like, hey, being able to do self-disclosure, knowing realistic expectations of how people should support you, and being able to say, no, that's shitty. Because, like, just to your point, Rachel, one of the weirdest therapeutic statements that I had to sort of wrap my mind around, you deserve as a human being to feel shitty feelings. Not you deserve to have to suffer through shitty feelings, but you deserve to get to have them. And you shouldn't have to clamp them down for someone else's convenience. Or for someone else like, oh shit, I made you feel something shitty. Please be better so I don't have to deal with my own guilt of that. And it's like, fuck you. I get to be sad about that. And that's really hard for a lot of people. And a lot of people would be way better off if they could deal with like, yeah, I'm sad about that. It's one of the reasons just going into what we were talking about and to a specific example, like any of my friends who have issues where they can't make it, I always try to be like, love you. I absolutely like would have loved to have had you here. I 100% get it. And I'm so glad that you're taking care of yourself. Because I also don't want it to be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Go take care of yourself. I'm like, no, because also like, we've highlighted people with mental health issues. That can feel alienating as fuck. It's like, oh, that pretty quickly leads to the, oh, no one cares if I actually love. And I'm like, yeah, no. I love you. I wish you were here with us at the table. I wish we could play the game. I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself. Go do that. And it doesn't, and for me, that kind of that script we spoke to, ritualize it, get it, that script applies to whether it's something with physical health or mental. It's the same. It's just like, yeah, I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. I'm sorry you're having to go through that. Wish you were here, but we'll get it next week. A week after that, next month.
We'll miss you this week, but I can't wait to see you next week,
Yeah.
right? Like just affirming that their friendship matters still.
I think going off of something you just said, Galway, that it is hard for people to kind of have that knowledge or awareness that like it's okay for me to feel bad things, not just okay, but like I deserve to be allowed to feel those things. It's worth noting that like the reason that is so hard for all of us is because we walk around in a world that has a lot of just often unspoken rules about communication that really don't need to be rules, right? That is part of my kind of dialogic training. is kind of unlearning these rules that are like, oh, I can't say this to that person because they might get hurt. And while there is a part of me that will always kind of be invested in best communication practices in terms of like I don't want to make hurt any worse than it needs to be, and as much as possible I want this to be productive. Like I think that's what communication is, but at the same time, like it's we limit ourselves when we carry around these assumptions that like, oh, I can't say that thing, or I can't broach that thing, or I can't feel that thing, and if I do it's bad, or if they feel that thing then that's bad. Like these are rules that we are kind of that we learn growing up in society, and so it takes a lot of effort to unlearn them, and and it's not easy, which is why I do think that when it comes to TTRPGs, like it's really helpful and useful for there to be somebody, ideally the GM, but somebody who can kind of facilitate and kind of model that kind of communication and some of those principles of like, look, we're going to be honest, and we're going to be honest because we care, and that we care about the relationships we form with each other. We care about the dynamic that we're co-constructing in this gaming space. Like that's where it's coming from. It's not, and if anybody here can't commit to that it's like, that we're doing this out of care for each other. If anybody here doesn't genuinely want to like build a positive, beautiful, fun space and build positive, fun, beautiful connections with everybody else here, then please share that now, because we have a problem. Right? We need to be on the same page. But it's uncomfortable. Like, yeah, Lena said in the chat, like it is awkward kind of doing this.
Yeah.
2 semesters I kind of co-facilitated an interpersonal communication, human relations seminar for undergraduate students that was built entirely on, look, we're not going to talk about anything other than these relationships, our perceptions of each other, what we want out of relationships with each other. We're not going to talk about what's outside of this room. We're not going to talk about the past or the future. It's just here and now. And it is the most amazingly awkward thing to see like students kind of come to terms with that, because they will fight claw and nail to like, no, I want to talk about what happened today. Like, nope, we're not talking about that. We're talking about right now. Or like, I want to talk about kind of ideas about community and humanity. Nope, we're not talking about that right now. Like, how do you view me? And you can view me like in a a negative way. But
as
if
the
we
person
can
making me talk about how I feel about you.
Right, exactly, yeah. But so like, so I think that but those experiences like often like they need to be facilitated,
Yeah.
and I think that like it's worth kind of having some patience for the fact that not everybody is going to be ready and willing and right away kind of comfortable diving into that kind of communication. For some people, being invited to communicate that way and being invited to think about communication and emotions that way might in itself be like might cause a lot of discomfort for them, and it might trigger something in them, and that's part of the game, right? Not the Dungeons and Dragons game, but the game of human life. And so it's endlessly complicated, but it has to be, I think it has to be an invitation into a space and an ongoing kind of process of creating space. It's not going to be perfect right away. People aren't going to be perfect at it right away.
Yeah.
We're never going to be perfect at it, but modeling it, facilitating it, and being really explicit about it. I've really benefited from playing games with Lena and having moments where she's kind of stepped in and kind of valued just being clear, direct, and explicit. Because like I said, like sometimes I lean more towards like I as much as I intellectually like value conflict and confrontation, I get it, this is important. My inner child and my shit that I am carrying around from my childhood just makes it that like, I don't want anybody to be upset. So anything I can say and however I can say it to kind of reduce that, I'm going to do it. But sometimes I need to be pushed back on that, and it's good for me.
Also modeling quick check-in behavior. Normally we would step away for about 5 minutes because we're about the midpoint. Are we cool with just sort of going through because we've got momentum, or do we want to step away? I'm good with either.
I don't need a break at the moment, but would happily if others
I'm going to stand up to turn on the ceiling fan, but I can still hear and talk. So
Okay. I'm good to keep going.
So a question also from Lena in the chat, or series of questions: how can players also lead these things when they're not necessarily in a leadership role? Do you need to be in a leadership role? Can you just step up and lead as a player? What if your GM isn't on the same page? I'm going to take sort of a cut at that generally, and then but I absolutely want this to be a discussion. I would say that the first 3 of those, I would say that yes, there are absolutely ways that you can lead that. You can present resources. You can present things like Guide to Consent in Gaming. You can consent. Lena has also, probably 45 minutes ago in chat, I just wanted to point out, had a really excellent suggestion around either a yellow card, red card system, which is we need to pause, red card, yellow card, we need to pause, red card, we need to stop. I also like the fact that my 8 years of soccer refereeing came out as I actually went into the delivering a card hand position. There's also the X card system, which is designed to, you can just sort of slide your DM a token. They're often meant to be designed to be anonymous that way of, I need this topic to die. This needs to happen. There's also an app that's being developed for that where all the parties can be on it, and basically one device is the DM or GMs, and the others are just player devices, and you can hit the button, and the DM sees someone needs to stop, and here's who it is so that you can talk to them, but no one else has to know anything. Those are great tools, and I just wanted to highlight that Lena had been talking about those. Those are excellent tools, and one division of this is there's tools to sort of set yourself up and try to get a framework, and then there's tools for fixing or stopping when bad things are starting to happen. And those card systems, X cards, etc., those fall brilliantly and very efficiently in that category. The thing that I really wanted to highlight, out of those 4 questions, yes, absolutely, players can suggest resources, players should suggest resources, and players should model this and be enthusiastic and be like, great, I'm so glad we're talking about this. What if your GM isn't on the same page? That's a harder one.
That's also like, I mean, not to be like, then find a better GM, but like, that's a big part. It's a big part. Like, we've talked so much about trust and vulnerability and communication, and if your GM like doesn't give a fuck about their players communicating or feeling comfortable, then like, you know what? Kick your GM out. You take over as GM and do a way better job.
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
And that's go. Sorry, Anne.
Well, I was gonna say, like, there might be a distinction between the GM not being on the same page in terms of maybe they're not there yet, like they're not just aware of that level of things, right? And then like not being on the same page is like, oh, I don't care about that.
Yeah,
right.
Let's distinguish between maybe a DM or GM who hasn't thought about this stuff or hasn't heard about these tools, or we've just discussed this is a journey, right? And it's an uncomfortable, shitty feeling journey. Or are they one of the D&D Twitter douche bros who's like, nah, my players, no, I'm going to be like killing kids and assaulting players left and right, and ain't nobody can tell me otherwise, or they can go home. I've always responded to that on Twitter directly as myself. I got blocked by a lot of people by doing this, by being like, good, you sending that player home is like the most constructive thing you have fucking offered. Everything else you have said is hot garbage. Sending that player home is a humanitarian act. Like, Jesus. And so that, I think, would be that line. Is this that they've never experienced this? Especially, are they coming from a place of privilege? Are they coming from a place where they've never had to think about this? And then I would still say tread carefully, because there needs to be, as we're pointing out, that trust. And if you can't trust them to handle these issues well, that could be bad. But that's much more a negotiated conversation where I'd say, again, to your sort of think, what is their intent here? Why are they not on this page? Is this they haven't developed that? Or are they being assholes? If they're assholes, find a different game.
Well, I would say, like, Lena just specifically said, it's not always as simple as finding a better GM.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's established friend groups, and one of your friends is apparently a shit about communication. Like, maybe this isn't like, I've worked really hard on cultivating friend groups and communication because I struggled with it a shit ton growing up. So, like, this is very important to me. Like, you shouldn't continue to be friends with somebody who is exhausting to be friends with. Like, if you have tried to build communication and build all these kinds of things, like, if like, you have to then kind of, and maybe I'm out of line here, but you have to then kind of weigh the benefits of continuing along with that. Because if it's somebody who's an established friend group or this or that, and like, nobody is willing to care, like, you're not willing to care about communication or your feelings or anything like that, are they, like, that to me brings up the question, are they even really a friend if you can't even, like, discuss any of those things or even think about that? And maybe I'm
Yeah.
overreacting some,
No,
but, like, this is super important to me as,
I
like, a
mean,
friend group thing.
yeah, I think that if you're in an established friend group, like it can be more awkward to bring things up sometimes because you're like, I really don't want to like step on feelings and then lose a whole group of friends
I've
and then all right.
literally gone to Elyse to talk to her about
Yeah,
this when I
we
struggled
have.
with it. So, been like,
Yeah,
"What should I do with this friend in my D&D group?" And she was
right.
helpful, so
Oh, thanks. But like I'm like I think that it's always more complicated, right? But there are times, right? Like we can kind of again put like in one category of like there are toxic friendships where like if you really can't talk to that person about like we need better communication practices at the table because sometimes I feel really like if that goes that badly, that table isn't
That's a
good,
red
right?
flag.
Like the
Red flag.
but like yeah, exactly. That's a red flag. That's a huge red flag as a friend and as a D&D player, like as someone at that table. But like hopefully you can go to that person, right? And help them build. Like say like, "Hey, something I've been noticing is that I'm having a really hard time at the table, like bringing up when I'm feeling uncomfortable with a topic could we look into some of these strategies and things and like if that person's receptive to building stuff right then like you work with them and like yeah if you are more familiar as a player than as the GM I think the best way to start that conversation is in private away from the table because there's in communication theory and probably in a lot of other like social theory kind of things is like face threats, right? The idea that like we have
Mhm.
face and our face is that we want people to like us. That's positive face, right? We want people to like us. We want to be seen as likable, friendly, good friends, whatever. And when people bring up things that challenge that, we get defensive. And that's what Rachel's been talking about, right? So face threats. And it is face threatening when a player comes to you as a GM and says something isn't working at your table, right? And so how do you mitigate face threat? And that's take it in a private conversation, face to face, do some upfront work of saying, like, hey, I know this is kind of awkward and it's something that I've been really thinking about and it's been bothering me. And then frame it from your experience, all the things we've kind of been talking about, right? And if that person is then receptive to, like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was a problem, but you're totally right. I would hate for you to be uncomfortable at the table. Let me learn more about this. Like, let's put practices. Do you have any suggestions? Then you know that you can build on that relationship and it's not this kind of toxic thing that you just have to toss to the side. And as hard as it is, as a GM and as a player, I think it's critically important to know when to walk away from a table or when to ask someone to walk away from a table because that fucking sucks to do. But I don't know that like nothing is less fun. And like I think like when everybody starts canceling every week kind of thing is when you're like maybe there's a problem and I should ask people, right? Because like sometimes it is just like that one person they bring the mood down every time, right? And like as a GM, as much as it sucks to do, like that needs to be addressed or your players will stop playing and you won't have a group, right? And so I don't know. I think that
I've straight up left a table before. I once had a GM friend who snapped at me over something, and it was a really heated moment, and he snapped at me, not my character, but, like, personally me, in a really mean and rude way, and I couldn't, at that moment, deal with it, and I got up and I was like, "I'm not gonna be talked to like this," and I left.
yep.
And we discussed it later and, like, worked through those things, but, like, you don't have to stay there and deal with things. Like, nobody was mad at me. You know, nobody was like, you ruined everything. They were like, yeah, you did what you had to do. And I've also not gone back to a table. There is a friend that we have here that I will never again play D&D with. I will hang out with him in group settings and be fine with that, but I will never do something vulnerable or this like that. And I've just learned that, and that's also okay. And to expand really just on what Elyse said, I had a friend and I talked with Elyse about this extensively when I was going through it because I kind of was unsure about how to, you know, how to go about it. But I had a friend that I was going to be starting another campaign with. And the first time we played together, it didn't go super well. Like she kind of treated my character really mean. I thought like there was a lot of things where I just felt really uncomfortable. And there was all these things I was very worried about. And she was very much seemingly like, I want things to go my way. If they don't, I'm upset or this or that. And I was very nervous about starting a campaign with her again. And like the week before we were going to start one, I just decided, like, I felt, and this is also okay about feeling vulnerable, I didn't feel like I could just go and talk to her. It felt like too much, too overwhelming. But I also didn't feel like I could ignore it. So I wrote her a letter. I wrote her a handwritten letter that I, dropped off at her apartment, and then we had a conversation afterwards. And that way I was able to get out my thoughts in a way where I felt like I was able to finish everything I needed to say. She could process it and then we could talk together. And her response was literally, I had no fucking idea that you were feeling this way. And I am so glad that you brought it up to me because I had no idea. So, how can we work through this campaign that we're going to be doing? What can we do to make sure that this isn't happening? And we've been playing this campaign since January. And she's like, we've had no issues. I don't feel any of those same things. So like it's also okay if you're not feeling good, you can put things in writing too. Like you don't have to always go and confront somebody in person. It can be establishing it first with writing and then having a discussion, you know.
Yeah. And that's certainly, and I think that the other thing, this is pivoting to a very sort of different aspect of this question of the maybe you should find a better GM. Sometimes it can be hard because there aren't necessarily that many tables in your locale. Like that was always a traditional problem. I encourage you to find on D&D Twitter some of the communities where I have not just random D&D Twitter. Do not just go to random D&D Twitter for a game. It could be bad. It could be real bad. But find people who talk about this stuff. Find people who sit there and scream at the trolls who posted lots of hate speech on Monty Cook Games. They probably know online games. It is easier than ever to get into an online game of D&D, and while, yes, it has differences, we've actually been talking about some of them. I would much rather someone found a better game that was better for who they are as a person and did less harm than try to make the best out of a bad. I don't even this is a plug. Join our Discord. It is a plug. We can find you games. I mean, between this, all four of us have DM'd games at one point or another. We know other people who do. I would rather you went and found someone who you can be like, hey, I've had these specific problems. Be like, you can come to me and I'm like, yeah, I understand that. Let me find you a DM who will care about that shit. Maybe they're not your friend, maybe you don't know them right now, but I am fortunate enough to know good people who are not going to subject you to fucking trauma because they had an encounter written. And like this gets me visibly heated. It pisses me off. That so many people are so shitty in a game that builds so much, in games that build so much.
Can I go off on that? Because as a game studies person, like this is a problem that's endemic to gamers, right? Of any type, TTRPGs, video games, whatever, even board games, right? There's this toxic culture around, but the game has a system that is God, right? The system of the game itself is the most important thing and nothing else is above that. And that mentality is one that comes from a privileged position of knowing that your identity as a straight, cis, white heterosexual dude, whatever man, right, gets to enjoy those games and not have to worry about the sexist pictures in the book, right? And not have to worry about the fact that you're never going to see a person of your gender represented because non-binary people don't exist in this world. Never going to have to worry about the person who writes, the like not fuck, but the other F word on the wall, right? Or puts like, makes a custom spray that they mod into Call of Duty that has like a man pulling a woman's hair that says dames don't belong in COD, right? Like these things exist in the gaming world because people don't understand what that type of oppression is. And when those games are built by people who have that type of privilege, they bake that kind of oppression into the game systems. And then people who don't feel upset by that because they're not personally oppressed, they're like, but the game is God. Like, but there are no queers in Star Wars, right? How dare you let us have homosexual relationships in the Old Republic? That was a whole thing, right? Like people got so mad. And and it's like, the people also don't go to the bathroom in Star Wars, but like, are we saying that people don't pee?
No, it's morally wrong, Elyse. It's morally wrong. It would be in the game if it was right.
One romantic relationship in the original Star Wars, and it's Han and Leia, and like nobody else.
Creepy.
And so we're like, oh, okay, well then as far as we know, the only two people by your logic in the world who have ever been in love are Han and Leia. End of list, right? Like it's just utterly stupid, but people want to protect those things because they want to protect privilege. And there's the old saying, when you're used to privilege, like equality feels like oppression. And it's like, you've got to get used to that. And that's, okay. But anyway, game studies, just saying what you're talking about, Galway, is like a bigger problem with gamer culture in general because of the way that bias and oppression are built into game systems and people don't recognize it due to their own positions of privilege. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. You can literally hire me to do this stuff.
And for one, that seems like that would be a great purchase. Two, I come out of a background of game studies and social theory, so yeah, I get all that. And three, that's part of why I get so pissed. Because people who look like me, people who have the identities that I do, need to get more pissed about this. Because
it's exhausting to be the person who always gets pissed because it's my identity on the line. And like that's coming from a pretty privileged position myself.
But that is, and exactly that's the thing, is like, no. Diffuse all of it. Call all of it. Yell at people about all of it. Tell them, fuck off. Great. You have these opinions. They're garbage. Also, I never want to see you at any of my tables.
Yep. It's just like you can go take your shitty opinions. There are so many tables out there where like gross men are running tables for gross men, and they are like, oh, we're inclusive. We just can't find women who want to play. No, you can't find women who want to play with you because you're an asshole. Like that's different.
Yeah, no, and it's like, yes, I also. I'm just going to end this because, like, not end this topic, but just like anything I can say that goes to, it's really not that hard to have more inclusivity in your NPCs, in your games. I don't know. I mean, it's not actually that hard with players, but in the way that you write things, it's like, hey, spend half an hour educating yourself and you can get some pretty good inclusivity in it. Some of my favorite NPCs that, in fact, people didn't come across. Like one that they explicitly didn't come across, who was one of my favorite NPCs in Tear Beyond the Doors, was non-binary. And I enjoyed getting to have a character that was an important part of their identity, and it wasn't weird to the world around them. And it's like, that was cool. I enjoyed that aspect of getting to build this NPC. They managed to yeet themselves right by them, but it's fine. It's a thing that happens.
That's a great point, though, about like the difference between having a diverse world and an inclusive world, right? That's why when people use these buzzwords, we say diversity and inclusion, because diversity, like having Black people in your campaign setting, is not the same as building an inclusive environment for Black players at your table. Right. And having, the existence of queer people in your story is not the same as building an inclusive environment at your table for queer players. And like those that idea of like diversity and inclusion, like, I mean, those are buzzwords and they can be overused and misused by corporations and whatever, but for the value that they bring, it's in that and, right? That togetherness of you have to have both diverse settings and campaigns and also inclusive tables and environments in both in your story, like your story has to have an inclusive world and at your table. And that's hard, right? And especially like as like I'm white and like I'm probably like, like we all need to be doing things right now, especially to be like dealing with racial injustice. And one thing that came up that came to mind was like the fact that Wizards of the Coast is finally now, after years and years and years of critique about this, in this moment of reckoning that we are now facing in America, Wizards of the Coast is finally dealing with the fact that like orcs have always been a stand-in in in fantasy for Black people, and it's a problem. It's a fucking problem, right? And like the fact that like races are now being decoupled from culture in Wizards of the Coast because people are like, this is racism, right? It's like these are the important things, and like you can do that at your table.
See episodes 1,
whether or
2,
not
and
Wizards of the Coast ever make it canonical, because
it doesn't fucking matter. It's your table.
It's your world. You get to decide, and you can decide. Every single GM and player can decide this table is going to not pick up those themes of racism, and in fact is going to like actively work against them. Yeah.
I would fucking rather play at a table that strictly interprets the rules for encumbrance and throws the entire racial alignment thing into the sun than vice versa. And let me
Did
point
you
out,
get your exact change for those coppers? Because
yeah, no, exactly. I would rather go to a table that fucking micromanages your inventory and is like, well, let's roll to see how many arrows you recover from this. And
technically only has 3 square feet of
right.
Of
So even though you can't
and
just talk about weight, you actually have to think about the space that it takes up as well.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely. I was joking. I'm like, see episodes 1, 2, 4, and 5 of Goat's Eye View because I fucking have railed against that because it's just trained as a sociologist. It bothers me because it's racist as fuck, and it's also just wrong beyond even just the. It's like you're using 2 words, and you even in some of your writing indicated you know what these words mean and how they're different, and then you fucked it all up anyway. So it's worse.
It's actually like so much more constraining in terms of like the imagination and creativity that's possible within these worlds to like stick to these strict like, oh, halflings are generally good aligned, oh, okay,
halflings are generally short. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway,
just to jump back to something that you had said before in part of this,
and part of my my TED Talk high horse speech.
You can stay on your high horse. You belong there. It's fine.
Aw, thanks.
It's also really important as a player or as a GM or anything like that, that when somebody tells you that something that has happened in the story or something that you said bothers them, that like you don't get to tell them it doesn't. Like just because. So like think about it, like Elyse said, we're pretty privileged. We're still women, so there are still things that we deal with based on that. And like there are certain things where like I was doing something with a friend and this thing came up that to me was just, and it was reading a book and it was from the perspective of a man, and what he did bothered me so much and how it affected the woman he was interacting with. But who I was with was just like, oh yeah, I see what they're doing. And I was just like, nope, we're going to pause because I need to explain to you right now why this sucks and why I am so annoyed at it. And I went into this whole conversation and I was willing to be vulnerable and angry and about that and talk about it. But like I went into this whole discussion about how it shows that like men don't respect women and their choices or their hard work or their like all of these things it was showing. And like afterwards he was like, yeah, I literally got none of that from it, because to me it was just like, oh yeah, he's just doing this thing and he was being kind of a dick. But like taking the time, if you can, to like explain why this is problematic, you can really help certain privileged people to understand things that they never come across themselves, you know?
And just as an addition to that, like there's obvious difference between expecting someone in a non-privileged position to do that work labor and being willing to volunteer yourself to do that labor, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so that's just like kind of a side, like, important caveat to
Absolutely,
what
yeah.
you were saying, as like, if you're willing to do that labor, and like I often am, because like, when do I not want to talk about these things? Have you looked at,
Mhm.
like, listened to one thing I've said tonight?
Have you heard
But
the
like,
TED Talks?
but for example, like, I like was in a Zoom call with like a bunch of my family, like extended family, like uncles and shit. And like, when racist stuff came up then, I could not, like, my anxiety was so through the roof. And I was like, that was the moment when I needed someone like my dad to be my ally, right?
Right.
That's the moment when I needed someone like my male cousin to step in and say, like, hey, you're like, this is right. But like, there are times and places and situations where those things are too much, and times and situations where those things are exactly what Rachel's saying, like these perfect moments to kind of like expand and help people understand. And like, it's 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 part of like the problem, not the problem, the work of being an ally is accepting that that shit is complicated and you're gonna fuck it up. And the sooner like we all kind of agree and like get over ourselves and like just like, yep, I'm gonna make that mistake. I'm gonna overstep sometimes. I'm not gonna step in other times. And I'm gonna have to deal with the fact that like I let someone down, or I didn't like use my voice when I wish that I had, like, in retrospect. Like, that's just part of being an ally. And like, that's and the burden, right? That's the burden shifting from less privileged people onto your own shoulders, right? That's the burden of that work. And like, that is, if that's what you want, if you want to be an ally, then that's what you're aiming for, right? Is holding that burden on your own shoulders instead of putting it on theirs. And so anyway,
And
again,
well,
my fucking TED Talks, y'all.
and to go off of something that actually Lena helped educate me to in terms of allyship, and that the emotions of that burden are not the responsibility of the person in the less privileged position to then relieve. No. They sit with you, and you sit quietly and you think about it, and you do the work inside yourself, and you do not fucking put that on anybody else right then.
Yep. One of my favorite, sorry, just really quick, one of my favorite like feminist things that like I like media that I consume started with this woman being like, all right, men in the room, I'm going to talk to you right now, and I'm going to say that for the rest of this talk I'm not talking to you, and if that makes you uncomfortable, I want you to ball that up and stuff it in your stomach and never talk about it, because that's what women do 90% of the time. And then she just never said anything to the men in the room again, and I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was telling you, I've started listening to this podcast recently that I really fucking love. And it's two Black queer journalists talking about difficult subjects. And, they had people writing in like, I really like the show. I don't really know if you're making it for white people or not, but I like it for this reason. And they were like, you know what? We're not fucking making it for white people. We're glad you're here. We're happy you're listening, and we want you to listen because these things are important. But we're not making this for you. And that's okay, because most fucking stuff that's out there is not made for us, So like, it's okay for you to consume something that's not directed at you. It's okay, like so many other people. This is getting way off topic, and
I
now
know
I'm
we're
just
so
talking about
far
things.
out in
I'm
left
sorry.
field.
I have passions.
Me too. It's okay.
And I like that. I'd rather talk about that because, again, this all touches on this space. These are conversations that should be happening.
Yeah, and just to tie it in is like what we've said multiple times, right? And Adam brought up at the beginning is that role play, right? I've joked many times, like watching Critical Role and like playing characters myself, like, character trauma, oops, my trauma, right? Like, we do that all the time with role play. And like, if you watch live action, like really good live play tables, like you can watch characters or like players at the table do that sometimes, right? Like, you're watching, you're like, I know that I'm like psychologizing a person right now, and that has its own set of problems, but like, that looked like that person was upset, not their character was upset, right? The level, and like that's, you know, the kind of joke that I've put on it is like, oops, my trauma, right? Like you just pull back the layers a little bit. And when, you know, I'm talking about my character's trauma, like this, usually 90% of the time, like somewhere deep down underneath that is like hidden gem of my own. And I feel like a lot of us do that in role-playing games, whether we mean to or not, is we design characters who ultimately have questions about life that are similar to our questions about life, and experiences that may be exaggerated forms of what we've gone through, or because it's, I mean, we're living in fantasy worlds where you can cast thaumaturgy to make your eyes glow, right? And so like exaggerated forms oftentimes of childhood traumas, or of, you know, experiences that you had as an adult that were like lasting with you, and you work those out at the table sometimes. And that's why I think this shit that we've been talking about matters, is because as a GM or as a fellow player, sometimes you have to look at your fellow players and think, I don't know this for a fact, but it's very possible that is Elyse trauma and not Minnow trauma happening right now. And like, just, and like being aware of things like, you know, oh, Elyse is a queer person and she's sitting at this table playing a queer character. Like, when we treat queer people a certain way in this game, we're treating her a certain way in this game, etc. Right? And like, there's just, I don't know. Yeah. And like, I'm seeing Lena pointing out like that's not always the case for everybody. And I think that's totally fair. Like a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to very strictly segment away like those things. Right. And that's important to recognize that, like, you know, don't psychologize people too much.
But I think that Lena's also by and large agreeing with you that the characters we play are aspects of ourselves. I have played a growly little lizard man, the goodest tiefling, and a very slow-talking turtle man, and they've all had aspects of myself. They've all had aspects of stuff that I'm wrestling with. Sometimes it isn't even trauma, it's stuff I'm trying to work on. And yeah, it comes through, and I also write. I cannot really imagine writing or portraying a character that I'm just like, not that doesn't look like me in some way, but like every single part of your experience is entirely alien and unrelatable to me. I don't know how I would do that. I don't
know why like people would want authors to do that.
Yeah, no, and I don't know. And that doesn't mean that you can't do, and this is my own tangent. That isn't an excuse to not have a diverse work. It is perfectly possible to find the elements of yourself within people who do not look like you, who do not talk like you, who are in some way different from you. It's not that fucking hard. If you're not doing it and it's like insurmountable, you probably haven't tried.
Research really generally shows that people have no trouble relating to people of other genders or races or physical characteristics as themselves. So, like, I mean, obviously, like some people are just assholes, but I'm saying like game companies are like, we can't have a black main character because most of our players are white. And research is like time and time again, studies have shown that that's completely bunk, and everybody is. You can empathize with a little dot that moves around a screen. You can empathize with a black person or with an Asian person. Like, it's not hard.
To do with that podcast I was talking about too. They specifically talked on one of their episodes about Tyler Perry and how like his movies and his things are so successful, and the majority of the audience that goes to see them are white. Like that means that they can connect with it and enjoy it and relate to it, just like all like cis het white people have been able to for like movies and books and things since the dawn of time.
This last like 3 minutes has been directed at you producers in Hollywood.
And owners of game companies.
And owners of game companies for sure.
Yeah, but and you know, sorry. I was about to take us onto an entirely different representational tangent of Wizards of the Coast, one step forward, one step back. I will briefly drop it in here. In their new upcoming thing, they've released a new multi-part boss so that they have phases. Frost Maiden. They decided to name it, I can't remember, it's like the Winter Crone, the Brittle Maiden, and the Frost Womb. Those are the three aspects of femininity, of course. Mm-hmm. We're going to just leave that, and we can talk about that later. Maybe we'll do a whole representation and how to not be a shitty writer in TTRPGs a little bit later on. But I still remember, because that announcement came literally the day after they did the press conference where they're like, hey, we're going to finally unfuck up race and this. And I'm like,
but meanwhile, let us tell you about how linked motherhood is to the experience of women.
I was like, Wizards of the Coast, did you not?
No
woman proofed this, did they?
This is why diversity at high levels in all companies matters too, in terms of diverse and inclusive environments, not just in the media that you produce, but in the workspaces that you create. Because if you have a diverse set of people, like multiple women, right? Multiple people of all sorts of races and whatever, people with disabilities, right? On high level executive positions, then like those conversations are constantly in the mix in ways that like my blind spots as a person, you know, like as a white person, I'm going to do my best to try and expand my viewpoint, but I'm never going to catch everything. And that's part of it. And so that's why like lots of people, and not putting it all on a single person of color, a single woman, right? But lots and lots of people constantly having those conversations. It also develops your acumen as a person to then be able to do that without someone coaching you through it, right? Once, once someone at Wizards of the Coast becomes aware of like this idea of motherhood being linked very problematically to femininity and womanhood, then like 2 years down the line, when they're in a similar writing position, they can be like, oh, wait, we shouldn't, link those things because now they've been exposed to that.
I also think it's worth noting, and I do have one other topic I want to talk about with communication at the table before we get into this, but I love the fact that the fucking, like, what is it, like, winter womb or whatever it is so problematic a term that no one bothers to notice that the second one is called the brittle maiden. And I'm like, there's just a whole, like, goodie bag to unpack there, but we can't even get to it because you fucked up worse after the comma.
3 different iterations of that cold bitch.
Yes. I was just like, I'm like, oh, Wizards, you're not good at this sometimes. So we kind of, I'm just gonna, for people's sake, because I did this table talking, how do you keep people communicating during the game, memory and communication afterwards, and hard talks can be good talks too. We've been talking about all of these and we've been going through this very organically, which is what I wanted to do. Absolutely. So before anyone, Rachel, feels the urge to apologize, I'm teasing you. No, I love this, and this was absolutely what I wanted to do. But just 2 things that I wanted to touch on, one of which we already did. Foster communication after the game as well. Adam phrased it really nicely. One of the tools that I had found is, and you saw it if you saw the finale of Tier Beyond the Doors. I asked people to do it on stream. After every session, ask the players, what's one thing you were proud of? What's something you were proud of the way you went? What's something that you really like how people should be proud of the way they play. And I think that this is one of the things that we get into. And as much as, for example, Matt Mercer pushes back on DMs don't have to DM like him, not just as like a quality standard, but an approach standard, because they shouldn't. He's not the only way to DM. He's perfect. He's not the perfect model. He's really, really damn good at it. He's a really good storyteller. His voices are amazing. He's a voice actor. Shocking. But that's one of the things that also happens with players. You don't need to be good at voices. You don't need to be good at giving an 8-page backstory, blah, blah, blah. But I want to celebrate the fact that you showed up at the table. And I, honestly, of all of the things that we would talk about, of all the things, the list that I would give are some consent tool. Have some goddamn consent tool. You may never need it. Like Elyse was saying, it may never be a thing that comes up. But if you do need it, you will be glad that you have something after the game that encourages people to be proud of themselves, to be proud of each other, and to be proud of yourselves. Because we also talked about rituals that build this trust. I literally, probably some of my favorite moments since I introduced that tool in Beyond the Doors. Cat's tail just cruised right across the camera. It was amazing. Kitty. Have been players just sharing with each other the stuff they were proud about. Celebrating each other's play, celebrating each other's moments, each other's lines. I fucking love it. It's why I want to do this. So I love getting to see that. And I love letting the players do that. I love everyone at the table. Like Tibby even mentioned in chat, like the first time we did it after Amberheart, she so appreciated everyone else jumping in and giving her stuff that like you like. It's like, I don't want it to just be my voice as the DM being like, here was good, because I'm not trying to steer your role playing. Weirdly, it's the opposite. I want you all to tell me what you're proud of so I can give you more chances to do that. I view that as my job as the so I would encourage people to implement something like that. And the last thing, and the thing that I wanted to talk about, because I'd love to hear people's different perspectives on these, is run a goddamn session 0. It doesn't actually have to be a session. It can be a 30-minute conversation. But the things that I would say, Rachel plus cat butt. Those are the things I would say, Rachel plus cat butt. The things that I would say you absolutely should have in it are, this is a moment to, if there needs to be anything done as a group with the informed consent, should happen here. You should 100% talk about tone. Because even in a non-traumatic, not, this is really awful for people way, I have been at tables where I didn't realize we weren't playing like epic high fantasy, and I spun up my character as I typically would, which sort of falls into that epic high fantasy, and everybody else was playing a joke character. Does not feel good. Like, I happen to just spin and improv my character. I'm like, okay, you need to be a joke now, buddy. And that was fine. I like playing at joke tables too. That wasn't a problem. But it would have been a really shitty person, or a really, really shitty feeling if I hadn't been comfortable doing that. I would have felt really out of place. I would not have had fun that session. And that could have been solved with 5 minutes of communication of like, hey guys, we're going to go really like loosey-goosey. It's a one-shot. Do you want to just do a sort of funny, humorous slapstick? Yeah, cool. Okay, let's do that. Like, okay, I would have written that from the beginning. And I would have been spared this moment of, oh shit, I should not talk about any of my backstory until I mentally rewrite this. And that's, so tone, the informed consent stuff, expectations around length, and any style stuff, I would say those always constitute the core of my session 0s. For example, back of kitty head, Rachel face. Yeah. I will always say to my players, especially if I know I have new players at the table, or players who haven't played with me, not even like new players to a TTRPG, just tell me what you want to do, and I will tell you if you can do it, and you probably can, because you're probably going to ask me cool stuff, so I'll probably let you do it. And I'll tell you how you do it, or what you need to roll. That's my job. That is arguably the main job that I have as the DM, is you present to me the actions you want to take, I present to you the mechanisms by which you... And you need to communicate that to people. Maybe you're not that DM. Maybe you want to have people who have memorized the player's handbook front to back. Sorry for you if you do. You've limited your player pool. And you've missed out on some of the most amazing storytellers I've ever seen. Definitely do not have the player's handbook memorized front to back. But that's fine. But you need to fucking establish that. If you haven't said, hey, this is kind of what I want, and then you're pissed off when everyone's doing that, nah, they're not in the wrong, you are. So I did want to talk about this very powerful tool of a session 0. What do you all like to do? What do you like to do? And Adam, you'd also alluded to it a little bit. I'm not... speak more, you not to do that, but like, we're here to have fun, right? And the moment it's not fun, we're gonna get it back, we're gonna fucking fix it so it's fun again. So those are the types of things, like, what do you all generally do? Kitty. Sorry.
I'm just giving the people what they want. I'm sorry. Keep talking.
I mean, I've never had the... Well, I guess I could have. I had the opportunity to do. So for me, session 0s for the 3 one-shots I've run have been kind of one-on-one session 0s, mm-hmm. which doesn't necessarily get at the idea of establishing group tone, but it does kind of give an opportunity for me to kind of communicate with each person about what kind of, like I said, like what my MO is, and what each player kind of, what their fears and expectations and hopes are for the game. And but again, that's just such a very specific, because to some degree each of the kind of games I've run have just been largely kind of experimental for me, and so it's just really important for me to kind of touch base with everybody. And
the
be
dog
like,
chasing her tail. Sorry.
Is there a dog now too?
She's chasing her tail.
Yeah, I can see it.
You can see her going in circles back there.
That's
sorry.
No, that's amazing.
It's so rude, Elyse. I can't believe you would do that. Malcolm is very disappointed.
Jesus Christ.
She's still doing it.
She's still doing it.
I forgot that was a thing that actually happened in the real world.
Meanwhile, Rachel just like force chokes her cat.
She chases her tail so hard she like does somersaults.
My kitten Calcifer will chase his tail through the blinds on our sliding glass door because then it's behind him and he's like, I can fucking stalk this thing. I'm like, it's your tail, dude. It's your tail.
I'm so sorry we got so far off base though with because Adam, I just wanted to like let you know that having like done those one-on-one session zeros with you as a GM for those one shots that I played for you, those were great experiences and so much fun to like build my character and kind of understand the world and the system and your expectations. Like I've always really appreciated the way that you did that, and so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Good. No,
I don't.
What happened?
She's like rolling right.
There's a little paw going.
Her paw is just waving in the background frantically. Oh, this dog. Okay.
No, thank you for saying that, Elyse. I'm glad, like, because it's always felt kind of patchworky for me of like, oh, I'm going to touch base with each person, and then I'm going to kind of like get ideas from people and kind of link them up with like each other, especially for those big gay works games. Like these relationships kind of happen, and it's. I kind of feel like having a session zero for those with everybody involved might be chaotic in and of itself. It's almost easier to kind of just establish role-playing opportunities and relationships and things that people can hook onto. But also I need to acknowledge that, like, you know, for Big Queer Orcs, I didn't do nearly as much of that as I would have liked to, right? And that part of it for me was like just it's communicating to everybody, like, look, I know that some of us might be feeling kind of like unmoored, like in terms of like what are we doing, like what are we going to be playing, and like I'm sorry, but also like I want us to trust each other that like that the game is going to emerge, the fun of it and the relationships of it, like it's going to happen. And I was more uncertain about that trust, not about the trust, but about that kind of faith in the game than ever with Big Queer Orcs. But fortunately, I think that it happened, like the chemistry emerged, and you know. So I think that there's a lot of value in session zeros for sure, and as much as possible, I think like I encourage that and aspire to it.
And just to respond specifically to something you would say, Adam, I would say that for Big Queer Orcs, you absolutely did session zero. It was broken out across individual sessions, but you had conversations with people about the characters they were making. You had conversations with people about the goal and the tone. And I was, for those of you who watched, you ended up seeing me near the end, I was on the entire time doing tech. So I was in there beforehand. You did more in the half hour before people got on stream than some proposed year-long campaigns do ever. And that's where you run into real problems, is if you're not like from, and I thought about this as much as I have not gotten to appear in one of the one-shots that you've done, I would have been oriented to what you wanted from me as a player. Like, oh, okay, we're here to have fun. It's fine to be silly. And everyone just needs to sort of collaborate and pick up the pieces and pick up whatever the people are putting down, you know, play and let these relationships develop. Cool. That's kind of the central part of all of this. Don't worry about the fucking system. It's a one-page RPG system anyway. Like I am in no way, shape, or form shit talking them. We just talked about this last week. I think they're awesome. But I just mean, it's not like there's a 500-page manual you need to know this obscure ruling in. It's going to be your DM being like, I guess roll the red die.
Yeah, Big Gay Orcs and specifically as a system also is like 80% of the system is built around how you build relationships and show relationships with each other. So like in that, and Spire, we did a session zero where all the players came together, and that one was like so much just like, what are the mechanics of Spire, just to like get people over the hurdle of like, I literally have no idea what's going on, right? Because none of us did. But there was also like a lot of tone stuff, and like I think, Galway, your point that like as a GM from the get-go, making clear what your tone for a campaign is going to be. And like I had like in the campaign that I ran with the all 4 new players, like one of the players was like the partner of another player that other people didn't know. And so they were really excited to play. And their partner said something to me, kind of, who was my friend, right? Said something kind of jokingly of like, oh, they love to play like, like prankster rogue types. And my other players were like, hey, we just want to make sure that like everyone's on board with like, we're going to show up sincerely to have like fantasy world fun and not like, like, and I was like, yeah, like, let me check in and like, just like, hey, just want to make sure like everyone's on board with like a sincere tone. Like this is an earnest playthrough of a fantasy world where like some people come in and like it's very similar to like you showing up with like the high elf to the table full of like, butt smoke McGee like character and like those
Butt smoke.
You heard me.
That was not far off from one of the characters' names at that table, incidentally.
We've all seen that character, right? We know that character through and through. And like that table is still fun, but like you have to establish with your players like that trust in session 0 ahead of time that like we're not going to show up and have one player just being like, oh, you're an elf. Well, elves are, and like everybody else is just like, ha ha ha. Yeah, elves are so dumb. And they have like their cosplay elf ears in their bag, like it has to, like, that's not, it's just, I don't know. I think session zeros are super important. And I know we're almost out of time. I just want to also say one practice I really like for post game is as the GM saying like, thanks everybody, you're free to go. I'm going to stick on the call for 5 more minutes if anyone wants to like jump back in, because then they can just leave and players don't have to know that like they're coming back, but you can just wait. And if someone pops back into the call, they're like, actually, right, you can catch that, like, what do they call it, like with doctor offices, like the doorknob complaint of like on the way out, like, actually I was wondering about this thing going on with my ears.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing of like as they're leaving, players sometimes are like, hey, wait, this thing, question, I just have a question about mechanics. Like it just helps with like the free flow of communication of just being like, I'll be on for 5 more minutes if anyone wants to say anything.
That's actually that's a really cool idea, and thought about that kind of thing and that opportunity because I know that I've done that, and like I'll end up DMing Andy in the Discord of like, wait, did I pick this thing up or this thing, or like did you add a stat block in? It's just some mundane technical question, but it's nice to have that opportunity of like right then it's off the top of my mind, because I'm sure as fuck not going to remember in 2 weeks. So yeah, that's a really good point.
There's fireworks happening and the dog's very upset. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
Aww.
That's very important. But the thing that I would also say, and this I feel kind of links back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, and especially that Elyse you were talking about so well earlier. As a GM, I would argue one of your responsibilities is either defining the tone, and that was always the way I would recommend going, and accepting that there could be uncomfortable conversations that involve saying no to people. If you're like, I want to be doing gritty realism, dark fantasy, and they're like, oh, but I have my character Slapstick Giggles McGee. Like, okay, maybe we rework that. What elements of that, is there anything that you want to keep from that? Do you want to just make an entirely new character now that you know that's the tone? And that's not a comfortable conversation to have. We were just discussing that. You're saying no to someone.
And we caught a really cool thing, actually. I don't think Ava would mind me sharing this. She was like, because Spire is like, everybody in the Spire session 0 was like, I guess I'm going to make an edgy character. And Ava was like, I don't know how to play edgy. I'm like, you don't have to, Minrai doesn't have to be edgy, right? She can be down with like killing and death on behalf of the clutch without being an edgelord. She can just be kind of like morally neutral towards killing outside of the idea or when it's in relationship to, right?
Yeah.
Protecting the clutch or whatever.
Not edgy at all. I like that was the thing where, I'm glad that she had talked about it, because I definitely, edge is not my strength. I'm definitely like when I get uncomfortable and things, bring in humor a little too much probably, and I just can't. Yeah, it's nice that we talked before about like in the session 0 thing and since then about, the balance we're trying to keep of yes, taking the thing seriously, but also like being able to have fun with our characters too and be a little bit ridiculous with them. So
So you're saying that we shouldn't be expecting Nero to suddenly be in like skin tight black leather and like brooding in the corner of a cafe in the town?
I mean, those are the art directions that I gave to Monty for when they're going to make my character, but
we'll see what they
do. God, when are we going to put Monty's art into the tier stream?
So I literally just emailed Monty today with my art information.
That they're also very busy and do.
And
they're I would love to share, with all of you. Anyway, okay, all right. I'm sorry.
but so I think given that we are right around 9, and I feel like we have managed to peter ourselves out into less relevant side topics, though still very important ones, such as dogs chasing their tails.
And Monty's amazing art.
And Monty's amazing art. Well, Monty's amazing art isn't a side topic. It's the main topic.
That's true.
Let's make it clear. Helpful Goat is a miraculous Monty art appreciation community and channel. Like, that's why we're fucking here. But I also just wanted to point out on these tangents that we've had, Tibby shared something very important in chat. One of her cats has a half tail, and when she tries to chase it, does somersaults instead.
That's wonderful and precious.
Everyone on audio only needed to understand that, because that mental image is amazing. I would like to thank all of you in the chat for tuning in, listening, watching us. I would especially like to thank Adam, Rachel, and Elyse for joining me tonight. I really appreciated getting to hear everybody's perspectives. As I do basically every week that I get to do these, I have shit that I want to go implement in my running of games, playing of games, thinking about allyship, thinking about all this. Like, I love getting to do these. I love getting to have these conversations. I really appreciate y'all making the time and sharing of yourselves. For everyone who is in the chat, if you are not already, you can use the !Discord command to join our Discord, wherein you can hear us do more of our TED Talks. Quite frequently. You can also, a new thing that we've implemented as part of our focus on our community, we're doing voting for Goat's Eye View topics. So you can have a chance to submit topics, you can have a chance to vote on what we do next. We have a lot of fun in there. You can also catch us streaming, such as I will be doing an internal stream that is only to the Discord coming up on this Thursday. Still kind of figuring out the time for my birthday. Streaming a game, because Rachel already did community gaming, and our amazing Sam sound guy did an entire Nuzlocke in one sitting.
Which was amazing.
A thing.
So funny.
13 hours.
Yeah, that was a thing. And it was amazing. So by all means, join us up in the Discord. I would like to remind you again that we have the BLM and donate commands, which will give you resources to help causes and finding ways that local community or in the wider world. Our overlay, not overlay you're seeing, but our we're not here right now, right at the moment, serves as a reminder that Twitch needs to hold harassers and abusers and guilty of sexual assault responsible, and especially when they have been using their channels as a means to do that and as a power base from which to do that, and those people need to be held accountable and not be on fucking Twitch. It's not a hard concept. We will be streaming the rest of this week. On Wednesday, we will have Dom and Dragons, where we play D&D with Dominic Monaghan, and we need to go kill Santa Claus. Not really, but I'm just going to leave you with that. You can watch the backlog to figure out what I mean. I play a very slow-talking turtle. He's a very, very good boy who is a proud member of the Small Business Association. On Thursday, Elyse and Rachel play Spire, in which you can have Rachel be an old man that eats people with an amazing hyena facts. Yes. Yeah, no, literally. I'm sorry. I wasn't meaning that metaphorically. She plays a cannibal. It's amazing. Not at all edgy. Just a cannibal. Very lighthearted, sparkle.
A senile old man cannibal,
With a cleaver, I believe.
Yeah, I have a war cleaver.
I like that it's a war. And then on Friday, you can again see Rachel and Elyse, who are gluttons for punishment, and we thank them for it so much. Playing in Tier Montreal, which I DM, in which the Marauders. Okay, I already spoiled in our Discord. I made a comment of like, hey, there's a bunch of mysteries, some of which are buried right down, some of which were very directly kind of actually pointed at right in the end of the episode, and we'll probably start out with them getting that episode deliberately surfaced to them if it if the players haven't noticed. But yeah, we have a lot of fun with that. We generally stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday here on Goat, which is twitch.tv/helpfulgoat. You can also follow us on our socials. Twitter is @helpfulgoat, Insta is @helpfulgoat. You can find us on Facebook, and our YouTube archive, which has our most up-to-date archives of everything, though it's a little bit behind because I've been is look for us on YouTube @helpful. From everyone here at Helpful Goat Gaming, again, thank you so much to my co-speakers for coming out.
Yeah,
Love
thanks
so
for
much.
hosting this again.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone in chat for tuning in, for the wonderful questions, for the wonderful feedback. Thank you so much to Lena, who deserves a mention of being a participant in this, even if she was not on the stream itself. And thank you so much. We love you all. Be safe. Be well. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, Rika.